Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Reaoch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Talk to Brazil, a leading business podcast, talks with business experts throughout the world. I'm Tom Reaoch, an American known as the King of Networking, connecting people from my studio in Brazil. My friend and business networking partner, Khudania Ajay, joins us again for chat number 7 from New Delhi, India. AJ hosts the global podcast show, the KAJ Masterclass Live, helping people learn better, earn better. And today is chat number 7 with AJ, where we always talk about business opportunities in Brazil and India. And today we talk about the Global South leadership role of India and Brazil.
Welcome once again to this very special series on India and Brazil on the KAJ Masterclass Live. Every fortnight, along with my esteemed friend, you can see him smiling on the screen on the other window. Every week, fortnight, along with my friend, esteemed friend, Tom Reaoch, and podcast host, we explore our nation's journeys in business, culture, and politics, podcasting also, as we strive to find our rightful place in the global arena. And as you can, my friend Tom Reaoch, he is joining us from Campinas, Brazil. He has spent his whole life there. He is an American, known in Brazil as the king of multicultural communication and networking. With a wealth of experience in market development and product management across diverse businesses, Tom is the founder and host of 3 business podcasts, a public speaker and author. His deep expertise and extensive network, he will provide invaluable insights into Brazil's dynamic landscape. And today we will be talking on India-Brazil Global South leadership, and that is what we will be. Welcome to the show, Tom, once again.
I want to thank you, AJ, and it's always a happy occasion. Today is our 7th chat. So we have been doing this for 7 times. Again, I want to congratulate you on getting this idea together of helping us together focus on 2 countries that are very important, India and Brazil. And we've seen after 7 chats that exactly that. The importance has always been there. Drawing attention to that importance is not only us talking about it, the world is talking about it. So when we talk about Global South leadership, it's becoming more evident of the place India and Brazil in the new global economy. So thank you. Recently we had the G20 meeting in India. So I'd like to hear what happened. How was that?
Absolutely. It was great, and not I am only saying it, but the world is saying it, and even the world media is saying this. And the biggest thing has been that India showcased what it thinks in terms of diplomacy, and their diplomacy, our diplomacy that we showcased from the very beginning was that that the world is one family. We use the word called Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That means that the world is one family. Our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he said that very, very clearly. Even earlier on, we talked about the moon landing, Chandrayaan 3. So there also, we also talked about the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam sort of a thing that we talk only about the humanity, about global. And this is what India is all about. Long years back, our ancestors, all those people, thousands of years back, even though when they had no idea how the world looked like, they always talked about humanity. So this is what the culture was showcased in terms of what we think. We don't think in isolation. We think in terms of a global world, the right world, where we are a family. And in that sense, where diplomacy was not diplomacy, it was much more of the messaging that we don't want to go it all alone. It has to be all together, a lot of people together, the globe together itself. And that is the biggest victory. That is where, if you see, for everyone was that the declaration, which was earlier looking like that it was not going to happen because there is not going to be any consensus, but it finally happened. And it finally happened with a lot of consensus, and agreement there. And that is where the biggest success was, that, okay, this is, India can talk sense at the high table and bring everyone to consensus. So everyone understood this. World media also understood it. They reported it like that. Even global leaders, global countries also, they have understood that India can, which has been taking on its responsibilities very, very seriously in terms of global affairs, in terms of a global citizen, as a very conscious country who knows about its role in all spheres, either it is in terms of security, in terms of climate change, or everything. India has been taking its rightful position, and it is not only taking care of its own interest, but it is taking care of the interests of the globe. And that's where this is what G20. If you want me to look at it, I could see it. I can see it in that particular sense, and it is very nice to see that it is moving forward, and the mantle of presidentship that is now passing from India to Brazil. So President Lula was here, and there was a declaration between India and Brazil there at point in time, and there was a discussion there. So I guess that was also a great thing. I was seeing that statement released by your government of Brazil, and that has many points in there. So I would like to understand now that the G20 presidentship is going to be with Brazil from December, though the gavel has already been given. So how do you look at it from that side of the world?
Well, very positively. And again, from where we are and were, it was like watching the soccer match, and sitting up in the upper deck and watching the players play. All right. And we've talked about that before. And what I talk about a lot is multicultural communication. And what your Premier Modi, did and still does very effectively at the G20 was to bring together all of the different points that you mentioned. Because obviously, the world, we would like to say it's one big happy family, right? But it's one family, but not necessarily happy. And it depends on where you sit at the table of how happy you are or aren't. Now, the attractive point, and again, looking as a spectator from a country that's sitting at the table, right, the G20 table, it was very impressive because to articulate relationships, we know that in business. Business succeeds because of personal relationships. And we have been talking about business between two countries, India and Brazil. So what we did see was examples, and speaking of India and Brazil, very favorable personal relationships between the Brazilian President Lula and the Indian Prime Minister, which led to the statement that you said, which is also very favorable. But beyond that, it was the statements made to the other G20, to the rest of the world during that context. So that's leadership. So when you lead at the table of the family and it's a small, the father gets up or the mother gets up and says, well, this is the way it's going to be. What we did see, and the reflection was, of people coming together, of maybe having different opinions, because we know that the developed countries have enjoyed much more of the world than the developing countries have. That's a fact, okay? What we see and hear from Premier Modi and also from President Lula is that the seats at the table need to be more equal. Each one of the world's children need to have a voice. and need to adjust to whatever the reality is. Because the reality in India, we've talked about that, the challenges, the successes, Brazil's the same thing, but many of the other countries. So the leadership role in what is being called the Global South leadership, and Premier Modi has stepped into that, President Lula will welcome that and will continue that to become the voice, become the leadership of like 100 other countries that really aren't necessarily at the G20 table, but need to have somebody speak in their favor. So that's what I've taken away, very positive, all right? Obviously challenges to get statements and everybody defending their individual positions. That's from countries. But on a positive side, it opens up for India and Brazil more attraction, all right? You mentioned the moonshot. We've talked about that here.
Right.
We talked about the laboratories here. So it did take the chance of opening to the world very successful engagements from India's part. You know, that surprised the world, surprised us. This, all right, you know, India has gone to the moon. And it's not going to the moon, it's what's behind that. The infrastructure, the science, the business, all has to happen, and it does. So that is the positive. So to see that leadership now being changed to Brazil and the continuity in the G20 with President Lula, again shows that continuity. There won't be I don't see a change coming in that direction. I see more positive reinforcement of the same things that Premier Modi and Lula defend, of a sustainable world. Because the challenges in Brazil and in India are very similar. It's sustainability. Both countries are huge producers of food, but both have huge challenges in feeding their own people. So that difference has been highlighted. And I see the continuity of, again, talking about the table, bringing the table. What President Lula has done is also defended the presence of India at the table in the United Nations, the Security Council.
Right.
So these are steps that I can only say it's positive. Right.
Absolutely. So, Tom, in terms of now, you know, India, Brazil, global South leadership. So this, I guess, with the G20 and now with the G20 presidency going to Brazil, a lot of you see the talk of G77 or the global South, if we see, this is almost like India and Brazil will be leading the leadership. The responsibility, we can say, is the right word. The responsibility from now onwards. How do you look at that? The role, the expanding role of India and Brazil in the global South leadership.
Well, what I see, and what has been favorably expressed in this statement, if we take the statement and look into the details, one thing is what was said in a collective environment, okay, of telling the world. The more important thing is what comes out in the statement. The statement, India-Brazil statement, is it's the chat between AJ and Tom. It's what we sit down and talk about, all right? And to that point, it's with Premier Modi and Lula and the rest sat down. Let's talk about what's important for us. We don't want to take ourselves out of the world, but we want to make sure that what we need mutually will happen, all right? So what is the favorable point that I see there? A number of different forums, business forums, were agreed to be established between the two countries. So that will be, obviously lead to more business-type persons sitting down at a table with more specific focus of the objectives India and Brazil together. So it's not to become isolationist, but it's to say, how can we highlight between the two countries the positivity that we have? We talked about science, we talked about agriculture. There are a number of areas that really need to be focused together. So exchanges in terms of know-how. So we're talking at different levels. So that actually came out. Is that going to happen tomorrow? But I'm positive that it will happen. So that light of putting people together, all right, real business type people, academics, scientists, journalists, having them together, that will be the secondary parts of how this goes forward in India and Brazil. So that's what I take away from a mega event. And the reflection that it will have on our relationships will certainly be positive.
Right, right, Tom. So as the world you see is passing through its own challenges, and globally leaders will try to deal with it, how do you see China's role in this? Because India and Brazil, they have their own independent relationship with China, and China is part of G77, and where it says it is not. So we always talk about G77 plus China. So it's G78. How do you see that, be calibrated by Brazil and India in their own manner at the same time, taking forward that whole leadership of the global South?
I think I'd use the word pragmatism. All right. And to that, obviously, Brazil has a very intense economic relationship with China. And we've spoken about that before. I've said that there are major investments, not recently, forever. The Chinese companies have been here. They've been investing in infrastructure and many other areas for a long time. So the relationship between Brazil and China has been ongoing for a while, all right? And it's not antagonic. We understand, because even though we have the investments coming from China, China is also one of the major clients of everything produced here in Brazil. So if we're talking about energy, if we're talking about food, we're talking about resources. So it is a two-way street. But again, China is not our neighbor. China is India's neighbor. Right? So it's in their mutual backyards. But again, at the dinner table, having the family sitting around and having those open chats and being pragmatic, I think that is the role for both Brazil and India and China. Because if we take that and say that's a tripod, China's a power. We're not going to say that it isn't. It is. It has massive influence in your part of the world. And that's a physical presence. But it's the dialogue. It's having the ability to talk and understand in a non-belligerent way. The easy thing is to let's fight. But we don't want to do that. The world doesn't need any more fighting. It does need pragmatic dialogue. And that's it. We've seen the world in the last years has become so separate. We've seen the right, the left, and everything. The poor guys, us in the middle, we don't know which way to look. So this collective relief, I can see happening. But again, it's step-by-step process. The statements that you mentioned, they show proof of that it's possible. So I think the positivity, people are looking at the world. They're not even looking at the world. They're looking into outer space. We're talking about the moon. We're talking about planets. We're talking about other things. So, but we do have to settle the challenges that are here. And nothing better than personal relationships. So the more we can, what can we do? What can AJ and Tom do? We can do what we're doing. Just keep talking about it. Attract more people to the opportunities that are there.
Right, Tom. Right. So with the G20 passing on to, presidentship passing on to Brazil, what is the talk amongst the media now? Are they hoping something big from this? What is the about the role of Brazil for the next 1 year? How are they looking at it? And especially, one new development that has happened is that this year, so African Union has been inducted as the new permanent member, and that is this part of the world is very close to your part of the world.
Well, our parts of the world, what we talk about the G20, but before we chatted, we talked about the BRICS meetings. We
Right.
talked about the meeting that was in South Africa. So it's a continuity of conversations. So we had the BRICS, we got the G20. It's going to be ongoing with the presidency here, with the presidency of banking institutions. We need to talk about money. So having more people talk about that and being involved in the dialogue, and we're talking about the South. We're going to talk about this in a future chat. What does that really mean? But again, leadership is leading, hopefully by good examples. And leading is people who want to follow. So if I mentioned, we've seen the success of the G20 from the world leaders going to India and what they saw and heard. I mentioned that President Lula is in the United States at the United Nations with over 50 world leaders wanting to speak with him there. So being a leader and having followers, the premier in India has created that and nurtures that and will. So I can see this dialogue, including Africa's. We've talked about Africa probably 6 chats ago, right? So I think it's more inclusion, more awareness that we need to talk, and I'm saying collectively, the countries in the global South will have probably more permanent types of conversations than previously, because there's more structure. So that structure of having tables in different places with chairs and sufficient chairs to invite people to come and sit is probably the first thing that has happened and needs to continue. So to welcome others to sit down at the table and talk.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I see that, the future times are not going to be of, say, keeping distance, but, but keeping much more closeness between neighbors or even the distant, what you call distant countries also, because you just cannot be away. Earlier, even if you were not getting together or were distant, nowadays the leadership is meeting in so many forums globally, and it's a continuous dialogue that happens. Maybe maybe not in track 1, but maybe in track 2, somewhere in the back alleys of the diplomatic world, there is talk going on, and this is a nice thing. That I think nowadays, in today's time, no countries can remain isolated.
No, and back to what we do. Your background as a journalist, you know that. Headlines could be good or bad. The content could be good or bad. There is so much good happening that many times people overlook it. Let's go back to what has actually happened from the G20 and what we're talking about Brazil and India. Recent headlines that I saw, the third largest manufacturer of airplanes in the world is a Brazilian company called Embraer.
Right.
And Embraer at the moment is in discussions with India to set up a manufacturing installation in India to start manufacturing airplanes in India. Because India is a massive market for air travel. So these are things that are happening. They may not be up on the billboard. Many people may not be seeing that. But this is just one example of many things that are happening. What we need to do, AJ, is to highlight those good examples. And that's what we will do in our chats.
Absolutely, absolutely. India and Brazil are big markets. India is a market in its own manner. Brazil is a market in its own manner. But one thing very much common is that in terms of podcasting, both are very solidly, very, very fast growing places, either in terms of listeners or in terms of podcasters, or even in terms of the world, which wants to, a lot of our guests, they want to reach our respective countries and they want to showcase their brand, their products, their services, or whatever it is. And, and it is nice to see that the spotlight is on the global south, two top nations of the global south leadership. So with this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass.
Well, one of the things I say and defend is exactly that. Be heard, be found. So before we can be found, somebody has to hear. So I think what you do, what I do, we try to help people hear to be found. So
absolutely. Be heard, be found, and there is no word here. There is no place for, getting lost here.
That's
always be to be discovered by the world. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you again. You can find more about Khudania Ajay on LinkedIn and youtube.com/KAJ Masterclass. Thanks to our listeners and sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence, specialists in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market. More about them on their site, www.focusmi.com. Talk to Tom, talk to the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.